So, no, thank you very much for that very warm welcome, Katharina. It's a pleasure for me to be here with so many people from so many different places within Europe. And yes, it's a bit of a different story. I guess I'm a bit odd in that sense. So back in around about 1987, I was a futures broker, which was one of those crazy sort of trading type jobs in the world of non-digital. So everything was manual, and we had the markets evolve into becoming super busy places because of Margaret Thatcher sort of liberalizing the whole market structures. And we suffered because we suddenly got busy. We got really, really busy. And to the point that I was suffering fainting attacks on train, panic attacks where I'd feel my chest closing in and really just couldn't breathe properly, to the point of even asking for help to go from the lower levels of the underground to the surface of the ground, because I just felt panicked. It was all because of the amount of the accumulation of the stress I was dealing with in these markets that I couldn't switch off. So I had no control over the job. I was just, there's your job, get on with it. And at the time, the management and the culture of those sort of business was very, very happy to let you just get on and suffer to some extent, because, they, back in the 80s, well-being in the workplace wasn't really something that was being discussed at all. It's because you turned up and you had a job and you worked and that was it. But I was suffering from this stress in a physical form of it, shaking before important announcements even, because I knew that what was going to come down the 10 speakers and 4 telephone lines was an awful lot of stuff to get on with and deal with clients shouting at me and whatnot. So that was the job. That was bad enough, you think. But I was also diagnosed with spinal arthritis called ankylosing spondylitis. So I was unable to play tennis as well as I could. I couldn't barely play golf. I had a lot of pain regarding that. And I was essentially put on 1,800 milligrams of ibuprofen as the treatment for that. So essentially I had 3 problems. I had the stress from the job. I had the physical impact of being active to becoming inactive because of arthritis. And essentially I was on ibuprofen. So I had this drug problem that when you're on that amount of ibuprofen, you kind of get on it. And so food tasted metallic, and so the cumulative amount of that was that there was a lot of stress going on. And I did go to my mother's, and she looked at me and said, "So what do you want to talk about?" Because she obviously saw something in me that said, I guess, help. And I then sort of shared my vulnerability to some extent with her, just saying, "Oh, this going on, that going on. It's just difficult. I'm thinking about the job. Is it the right thing?" And then she essentially revealed that my grandmother herself was very interested in the concept of healing. Now, I don't know what that meant in terms of, somebody in the 1960s, 1970s, what that actually meant. But it's just very interesting to know that she had that philosophy. And so my mother said, "Well, why don't you go to the library and see what you can find?" And I went to the library, and there was literally nothing there. I think alternative medicine was starting to evolve. There was nothing necessarily very, very clear, but I did find a research piece that was about using the mind as sort of a muscle and just doing these exercises to manage self. It talked about presence. It talked about being in the moment, but it didn't say mindfulness. I don't even know that word was around in 1987, certainly in common parlance. And I sort of read this paper and thought, this is interesting. I had naturally, I seemed to have an interest in me, but I also had a reason to commit. I had these 3 reasons to think, I kind of need to change and deal with this, because this is sort of killing me. And so I just developed these exercises, and they were breath, they were some visualization, there were some extensions of breath, and I guess enjoyed doing them. And after about a month of doing these things, and I was doing 3 or 4 times a day of these simple exercises. After a month, I'd come off of 1,800 milligrams of ibuprofen down to about 200, and that was just for night time. And sorry, can you just? And as a result of that, I was also at work. I was far less stressed. I mean, significantly less stressed. And I was walking towards busyness in terms of being busy with some degree of comfort. I was also walking toward complexity. And I was never a mathematician, but I was happy to take on the evolving options market, which is all about maths, with some ease. And these things were surprising me because I was almost like changing the way that I was wired to sort of do things quite differently and with a positive air. So I was starting to build very different networks within the business that people noticed. So people noticed that I was more approachable. I was listening better. I was also actually able to step back from my role and bring others in to support me rather than historically being sort of mine, don't get near my flow. I want this flow, it's mine, because it was all about ego, and just winning. And I was letting loose of that, but bringing others into the conversation because I was having a lot more compassion about just me managing me. And I just thought I'd found this superpower. It felt like that, and it was free. It didn't cost me anything other than the commitment to do it. It wasn't taking a lot of time, particularly, and it was quite pleasant to take myself to those places. And so that was sort of my beginning, and it lasted it lasted as a secret until it was around about 2010, 2012. We had somebody come into the business, and I was still within RBS NatWest at the time, for some CPD points. I don't know, those in the corporate space, you can collect some points because you did some training at lunchtime. And this fella turned up, he looked like Father Christmas, just to give you some context. And he was telling us about this thing called mindfulness that I'd never heard of. But when he started to talk about it, I'm just thinking, okay, this is like resonating hugely with what I'm doing. But it didn't come from any sense of authority. He'd been on a course and talked about this certificate he had. And you could tell that he was almost not practicing. It didn't come across. It wasn't showing within him that he was doing anything other than almost reciting from a book. And I approached human resources at the time because I was in the trading environment and said, look, and I had reason to do that because I had a line manager that was driving me nuts at the time. So to have a diversion where I was having this positive conversation with HR and giving something to the business. And the conversation went something like, I'd like to do a pilot because I think I can communicate this from a better sense of having done it and practice. And I got the stories and I've got the various examples of how you can and can't use this. And I'd like to bring it to life in the context of a corporate environment wrapped up to suit the business need on the outcomes that I think the business requires, rather than presuming it. And HR allowed me to create that, which I duly delivered. And it had a remarkable impact. It was very, very short. I mean, but it was almost like, because it was short, it was more effective because it gave people these sound bites of what to do, how to do it, and then the sort of a pathway to follow. And many still email me today. I mean, years later, telling me they're still doing it, it's still working for them, and thank you so much. And it just started to get bigger. And at some point, I was invited to join the private sector working group of the Mindfulness Initiative that I'm sure Jamie Bristow invited me to that because, we worked for a big bank, we were doing this stuff. It wasn't MBCT, MBSR by any means, and it wasn't a clinical delivery by any means, but it was still a variant that he was paying attention to, was the workplace was evolving, into this space. And so, every week the thing just grew. You could just sense it going boom every week, and something like 40,000 people attended, and it was the most attended non-mandatory training in the bank's history. But yes, it was.
Let me get into that, please. So after that presentation of a man without a name, who didn't have, in your view, an authority, who didn't speak from an embodiment, can I say it that way? That's the mindfulness lingo that we use, not from embodiment. It was not he that you engaged for a pilot, but it was you who said, I can do that from my experience. Did I get that correctly?
Yeah, I spoke to HR, Human Resources. I said, I can do that from my experience.
Okay, instead of hiring the one who gave the presentation.
Correct.
Okay, and that was your start. And then with that start, you actually shared what you had experienced, and you shared the exercises that you were doing daily. Is that correct?
That's right. I told my story and shared my vulnerability and showed them what I did, but some of what I did, not all of it.
Uh-huh. And was that, did you first give them the explanation and then the exercises, or how did you do it?
I had to kind of sell it to them. I had to sort of share the foundations of what it is, and what it represents. And I do like the Dorothy moment in Wizard of Oz, where it's a black and white world, but then the door breaks down and suddenly it's HDMI color. And the experience I had, it felt like I'd entered a different world where my senses were really, really tuned in. And so I'd tell that story, but I'd also share the story of, what does the mindset look like in this sort of fairly standard world? And, it's sort of stressed, it doesn't sleep well, it doesn't pay attention, it doesn't listen. And actually, with a short amount of this, I found the transition from a mindset that felt quite rigid to a mindset that started to think very creatively, that was calmer, that had a greater vision about things, was better managing self. I'd also show them the risks, a very basic few diagrams of, what flight, fight, faint, or freeze looks like, and what it does to the system when we don't pay attention to ourselves and we start getting in these negative spirals. So I share that as well, and a little bit of what mind wandering looks like and why we do it, and some of the risks of that. And then after about literally half an hour, I say, look, I'm inviting you, would you like to join in? And I put a bit of a thing at the beginning saying, for those that have suffered any trauma or have any medical condition, then, feel that you can just step out and just listen to these as words, but those that want to join in, join in. And then some conclusions around, what people could do and how people could do it, purely based upon my story. Mm-hmm. So this was not me referencing any MBSR, or MBCT, or any other, sort of course. It was me telling them about me, because that was the only story I believed, because I knew that it worked on me. And from the feedback I had from nearly 3,000 emails, it was working for people as well.
And it was your way to address the particular culture. Like you said, you were selling it to them, translating into convincing people to take out time because they were busy, and take out time to just have a moment and hear your story and maybe find something in it. Yes. That's what you mean by selling, right?
Exactly.
But you also, and that is also the title of today's, why you and I chose this title, you also chose to communicate that there would be an outcome, that it would not just be being, but there would be, through the being, an outcome that was interesting for them. Is that correct?
That's right, yes.
Because this is what in business, what makes people be convinced that they should put their time in it. There must be a return on their investment.
Well, absolutely. You're quite right. I had somebody approach me that was looking for someone to come and deliver into, is actually a large university. And she came across my profile on LinkedIn, and she immediately contacted me saying, okay, I'd like to speak to you about what you can deliver for us. And when I actually did speak to her, I said, do you know what, Mark, the reason why I wanted to speak to you is that you're the only person that I've looked at in terms of how they're pushing this, is you want to know what outcomes we as the client are looking for. And you seek to solve for those outcomes. So it might be mindfulness linked with workplace stress. It might be workplace stress per se. It might be all sorts of elements of that, but they saw me as this creative vehicle that they could use to deliver to the outcomes that they wanted. And that's how that engagement worked.
And that is also when you talk about feedback from thousands of people, that is the feedback you get, that it is linked to what they need, to what they desire.
Yeah, well, the feedback was extraordinary. I mean, some of it would just make you cry. It was almost like I was opening the door for them to understand themselves better, opening the door for them to see perhaps a new way of engaging with life. I mean, I had, literally that people almost telling me that I'd saved their life. Comments like, I'm now in a much more positive place now, thank you. You get an email like that, that tells you an awful lot. But we had people saying that had come in that was super stressed. They had blood problems in terms of diabetic blood problems. They were saying they were at very low blood sugar. They were feeling weak, but they came out of just this little glimpse of what this can do, feeling entirely different. And it was when I started to get the emails, really, that I started to understand the power of the composition of my delivery, and perhaps how I embodied it, and my tone and my language and the content and the storytelling that went with it was something that was very, very precious.
Mm-hmm. So the embodiment is something that is a common denominator with other programs as well, but it's also the storytelling that you emphasize. Before getting into the question on what the difference is between your program and why you set it apart from MBCT, MBSR, whatever, I would like to invite people here, like Stasi, Myrto, I think maybe also you, Chris, and Robert. You're also in a corporate environment. Can you maybe speak to what Mark said about embodiment, and speaking to that particular culture where you have to talk about outcomes in order to get the attention and curiosity of the group that you serve? May I invite one of you, and if I didn't say a name of someone who caters to the workplace, please feel invited.
Hi, Katarina.
Yes, thank you, Mark.
Yeah. Well, thank you for the opportunity to have this discussion. And Mark, thank you for sharing your story. It's very inspiring. Similar story with me as well. Just on the topic of the question that Katarina just voiced, I think on my side, it was when I started teaching in corporates in the beginning, I realized that it was the fact that I had to make a promise of some desired outcomes by the end of some program was directly opposite to what I had been taught and what I had been practicing with mindfulness and insight meditation for 6 years before I started teaching it in that way. So it was a big struggle to realize that I had to, let's say, talk about what people were going to get afterwards. So that sort of convinced me, or tell me why should I do this? Why should I waste my time? Or why should I invest my time into this practice that, let's be honest, is not always producing immediate results. And we all know that nowadays people want to see results immediately. So it was kind of opposite to what I had been trained and what my actual personal practice was about. But I realized that this is a way to open a door and speak in a language and in a way that organizations are willing to listen to. And then I sort of realized that it was not promising something that is not true, but actually outlining what we already know through the research that is quite extensive on the application of mindfulness and how it supports us in all levels, physical, mental, and emotional. So for me, I guess the bridge with that was to talk a lot about the science behind it and be careful about the languaging in terms of what is the, let's say, the outcome of such a program, in the sense that I would always leave a disclaimer that it's always up to us. It always has to do with what we put in. It always has to do with how much we want to invest in ourselves and how open we want to be with what is going to come up. So I think that for me it's about describing what a program is about, what an intervention is about, and giving the potential outcomes. But then once we're in the program, making sure in the beginning to open the door for participants for the unknown and to let all this potential, what could happen, be there without being very attached to the outcome. I think that makes it a little bit more relaxing. But that usually happens for me. The way at least I see sort of working with it is once you're in there and we're starting on this journey, let me tell you, put your expectations on the side. But in advance, when talking to HR directors, when talking to all the stakeholders that are deciding about the implementation of such programs, or CEOs in many cases, then yes, because we want to talk about, I found that it's inevitable to talk about outcomes and objectives and what this is going to lead to. Let me not even say the word ROI on the investment, but these are the conversations that we're having. But then once the actual participants are in, I want to always leave a door open for the unknown and just to let the practice do its work on its own.
Mark, is that the way you bring it? I understood that mainly also in contact with the participants, you will emphasize that your story that brought you there, but that the time they invest also for them, you work towards an outcome, not only for the decision makers, but for the participants.
Well, yes, indeed. And perhaps it's time to extend the story a little bit on me, because that story so far has evolved. And that was when, I got retired, and I'm now doing sort of consultancy work, as Stati was saying, towards corporates, getting sort of, mindfulness sort of courses based upon the outcomes of what they wanted, or mindfulness-based content configured to various outcomes, because corporates have various outcomes. And it was okay. And that was my business for a while. And then suddenly something struck me that I was being a bit dumb about my business model, that I actually had 37 years of a career in markets. So I knew an area of business, trading, broking, very, very well. But I also had a pretty good grip on mindfulness, and that's fine. And so I then started to look at the business model slightly, to think, well, how can I be more attractive to the corporate world? And that's when I had lunch with a coach in London, where he was in the similar space, already doing some coaching, but using Gestalt, Gestalt practice as his backbone and behavior finance. And my backbone, I can perhaps safely say, is mindfulness, as I see it. But I've also got this market experience. And so we got together over a 1-hour lunch that lasted 5 hours. And we suddenly realized that we had an opportunity. And this was just pre-COVID. Now, to some extent, this is about, well, how do you position to get into corporates and stuff like that? And I think this conversation is geared to that. The first thing we did is that we started up a podcast. just to bring guests in, from the world of trading psychology and sports psychology, other people similar to us, and just talk about the challenges of high pressure environments, managing self, determining your edge, all those types of topics that are involved in trading. And I think we got to about episode 10 and we got an email. We got an email from one of the largest clients in America, commodity trading clients in America. Huge. Basically, the email said, we've been looking for this type of approach, this combination of thinking to bring into our business. And that's almost immediately created us a super large corporate as a client, where we then built in the AlphaMind Project, and that created a model approach of coaching that we took into this client. But I was interweaving within this product mindfulness, about a good state of being. What does that mean? A sense of calmness, sense of a beginner's mind, because it fit the coaching model. It fit in with the management of self through huge difficulties and the need to stay in tune with that, and about how letting go is important and how we can let go. And I actually shared my story of letting go, where I'm interviewed as part of the process, and share the pain I went through, and actually share a practice at the end of the fourth workshop. There's 4 of them, where I actually share what I did, and it absolutely blew people away. Now, we very, very quickly won another huge client. And in the past 3 weeks, we've won 3 clients, and we haven't marketed, but we're talking in a podcast. And that podcast is winning this business, because suddenly we have a channel to big corporate people that are listening in, and they're sort of understanding the dialogue that we bring and think, this is the dialogue we want to bring to our people. It's not rigid. It's got some creativity. It's got some entrepreneurial flavor to it, that they sense that we can co-create things working with them. And it's often the business leaders that are contacting us and not HR. HR has limited spend capability in its own right. It's a cost center, not a profit center, in pretty much every corporate. And often it will look to try to internalize something if you try to present something to them. However, business managers own income on it. They own the income of those businesses and can make big picture decisions if they see this as a way to optimize the ecosystem of their business. And so we've suddenly got this product that's got mindfulness in it, subtly, that's essentially an ecosystem optimization product that we're winning significant business on because we've framed it. I could never do that with MBCT, MBSR. Of course, it's clinical delivery in it. You take an MBCT, MBSR into a corporate, I think just be very, very careful, because you're taking in something that's meant for real clinical purposes. And I think your insurance will be pretty much compromised if you've got a problem out of that. So I don't want to go near that space. That's kind of sacred for the clinical world. But I am in this sort of creative entrepreneurial place where I kind of just like to play with it and just see what can be created from it, but still keeping quite true to some of the philosophy. But I thought, Catherine, it's just good to share that. I mean, after what was just disclosed there, that actually I found a bigger opportunity by being sort of stepping back a little bit and just reconsidering where I was, but in partner with somebody, and then going on a journey with a marketing plan that wasn't there at all. It was just a podcast. But the podcast won us business and carries on winning us business. It's the AlphaMind podcast for those that want to listen. But I think it was just an example. And I think when we first spoke, Katerina, that actually there are different ways of building business. And of course, everyone here is looking to, how do I build connectivity? How do I get in? Well, we're in, and we haven't even tried. Someone's just said, well, here's a door open. Come on in. And that's really, really rare, but it tells us that we've kind of got this formula right.
Mm-hmm. And what I hear you say is we did not want to translate something that we didn't know from our own bones, from our own experience. And so you got the narrative from a culture that you knew well.
Correct.
And went back to it to give them tools to work with the stress that they experienced. And you understood them because you'd been there. And they understood you because you had the narrative that spoke to them.
Exactly. And of course, we talked about it as performance in general, but we were stress managing, we were managing mental health within the fabric of the work. But we knew that there was appetite to look at leadership and performance. There is budget in corporates to look at leadership and performance, far more than there is budget to look after well-being that's often gets given to HR. So we were sort of bringing in the well-being and the mindfulness-based approaches within the broader context of performance. And that was the thing that was very, very interesting to the people that have approached us. I almost said who we approached, but it's the other way around. Everyone so far has approached us without no effort. So, and it's because they're starting to hear, in their communities that, there's this team AlphaMind that's now bringing these sensitive topics that are almost the opposite end of the spectrum to what markets is, which is sort of, testosterone, aggressive sort of type business. We're kind of bringing in these softer skills with a lot of integrity. And I think, as you're right to say, the storytelling of our lived experience to bolster these conversations. And within the framework of the workshops, we get others to share their stories as well, within the safe environment. And that just really boosts the effectiveness and why they've become so very, very popular.
And also the fact that when the decision makers that you address or that address you are the ones who are product and loss responsible, they want the performance, they are budget holders, so they can make the decisions, but they will also be different ambassadors than HR people, because HR is typically seen as a cost aspect, while performance is generating money. Now, we have seen things like Time Magazine and others have published that in those situations, mindfulness practice would only be a way to keep people even higher achievers and to even pressure them more. Did you ever experience that people who took your courses felt that way, that it was a way to pressure them more?
No, I think the general philosophy was summed up by a lady in one of our sessions who essentially told us in Asia, she said, so you're not looking to make me a better trader, you're looking to make me a better version of me. So it wasn't about the performance in terms of money, but it was about the benefit of a team that was just in a better state of being, but also a team that was starting to communicate across the boundaries better, which I talked about the ecosystem. So we were generating a smarter ecosystem now, where people were happier, people were dealing with the inevitable stress in a better way. At least they knew how to deal with it if it turned up. They couldn't predict necessarily what stress turned up. There are times when they would have no stress. But in times of having no stress, they still needed curiosity. They still needed a beginner's mind approach to start to see ideas. And a lot of business is done without stress. I've done general business that we're still performing, but it doesn't necessarily come from stress. But actually the performance comes from having the creativity to see an opportunity and a desire to push that through and commit to something using the right language and the right sense of clarity and the right sense of self-control. So I think performance covers many things, not just making money.
So when you address it in this way, you work with a group of individuals. At the same time, do you get any feedback on how the organization changes? When we look at, for example, what is now coined social mindfulness, where we go beyond the individual who's training, we go to how the organization as a whole is educated to work together in a different way and to work on values other than money, like you just said, which is a culture change based on mindfulness. Is there anything in your observation that you see that happen or not yet?
Yeah, absolutely. And we're told it's happening. So we're told we're improving the culture of these businesses. And I know the work of Mark Leonard and social mindfulness, I think, is incredibly important to learn together and to immerse together and to fact find together. And we kind of mix the teams up as well. So they get, we have graduates with senior people. And it's very surprising just how they almost forget their grade and they just work together. And that's really, really important, because a lot of the stress comes from fear of the fear of being worried about asking a question. And if you feel that you can communicate better within a corporate culture, then, you learn better because you've got a bridge with somebody, because you did a workshop with them, that you're happy to approach and ask them a question. And feeling that people's doors are open for better communication is really, really important for managing stress of a business. If you can't feel that you can ask a question and that everyone's looking at you and pointing and no one really speaks to each other, that's the source of significant stress within a business, despite what performance might be doing.
Yes, and in that case, there is not only the individual benefit, but people are acting are acting differently towards each other, serving other values than they did before, and maybe making work lighter for themselves, having different experiences, collaborating better, working better with clients, with suppliers. So do you address that actively, or is it an outcome as a side effect?
No, the first corporate we dealt with actually started to see the fact that this just wasn't about trading. So they were starting to get people from the operational team involved, people from the business development team involved, so that they could all collectively work together in understanding this journey that we took them on for the benefit of the whole business. Like I say, so it wasn't just trading, it was sort of the big ecosystem that sat around them, that they were starting to feel better about. They were feeling, it was almost sort of cultural stress we were managing, but also giving them cultural opportunity. And I think some of the phrases that we've used so far, beginner's mind is a lovely phrase, where you come at something, without bias. But in the world of the corporate world, often you do something because, I've seen this before, I'll just do it like this, I've seen it before, rather than appreciating where you are at any given moment. And because you behave like you've seen it before, often you do something by habit and something that's wrong. So I think this sense of self-awareness and group awareness and cultural awareness is something that we're helping to develop through these type of workshops. And as you say, the work of Mark Leonard with social mindfulness fits into that very well. And I'm delighted, certainly at Bamba, with the Amber, we've seen it as a recognized program. And I think that is a marvelous step, because learning together it's fun for a start. Okay, and we need to allow the fact that we can play from time to time and have a bit of fun. It is fun learning together. And I think we learn from each other's stories to feel that, I'm not alone, is also really, really important as we go through, whatever training we're doing. I know that Mark's work, and I've been through that curriculum, does exactly that. There's some storytelling, shared experience. What does it feel like for you? And we can talk about it together. And of course, if you go on a relatively straightforward mindfulness course, certainly the ones I've been on, the non-clinical ones, it's almost done in you're sort of an isolated person within that course, just interacting with the, you know, the presenter, if that's the right way of putting it, and that's your journey. So I think there's huge benefit in this sort of social aspect. And certainly when you're engaging with a corporate to recognize that. So because if you go in just assuming they're a bunch of individuals, then you know you don't get anywhere near the benefit by assuming that they're within an ecosystem that are looking to just flourish in a very, very different way.
Yes, and it's encouraging, because when people experience that this is not only an individual thing, but that together they can achieve more, then there is consolation, there is hope. And we are also departing from that illusion of being an individual that can isolate. And because of being an individual, we are too weak to work on the big themes of the world. I would like to invite another person from who is here present. Maybe Stasi or Daniela, you're both working in corporates. Would you please chime in and tell your story or ask questions that are coming up while Mark is telling us how he works? Yes, Stasi, I see you.
Yeah. Hello, everyone, and thanks for these stories, Mark and Marito. I am, well, my mission, I think, is, although I live in the UK and study here as well as do some work, of course, in the field of mindfulness, but I also, my mission is to bring that to my country of origin, to Bulgaria, and where they know me mostly like a coach and consultant. And yeah, my ambition is to start more and more programs there, which I have been doing actually. What I did already with several companies was kind of a breakthrough exactly during COVID, because it was a very, how to say, maybe even a lucky moment. I was part of a webinar. It was one of the many online. It was called Humans of Healthcare, organized by Mindful organization, the journal Mindful, and its foundation. And they were really, literally, it was mid 2021, and there were, I think, 1,000 nurses and medical professionals on that, just discussing how they were coping throughout the first year of COVID in 2020, and how they were keeping sane, what was happening in their companies, and who organized what. And I really focused on the many stories that were shared, including through the chats on Zoom, and literally took out this information from chat and then organized it almost like my own research of what people say. And they were literally mentioning, almost everyone, meditation that they were doing by themselves or in groups, and how this happened. And so I made a case out of that. I wrote it down, and I approached a few pharmaceutical companies in Bulgaria who were, they were not such a big, COVID was not as big as a crisis there, including in the pharmaceutical companies, but I don't know, I just decided to go to them through some people I knew, and I just wanted to invite them to meet. And I just gave them this information about what's happening amongst nurses and other medical professionals, young doctors here as well in the UK. And they really got very interested because, yeah, they saw the numbers, basically. So yeah, some very, I don't know, simple participation in a webinar that I turned into a case, won a few leads in some business in there. I don't know if that's interesting for you. That's what my experience is. I'm still in the beginning of bringing mindfulness to Bulgaria and Bulgarian public. So
that's very entrepreneurial of you, actually.
Thank you.
We all, to some extent, have to find our own way and a method that works for us. And actually using real data, real sort of feeling data, which is why these emails that I've got 2,500, it's about people's stories saying, look, this is how you're helping me. That to me is much, much more powerful to tell than to say, yeah, there's people are 10% happier or 5% less stressed or something. I want those stories. I want the stories of the guy that's physical repair has been helped by the meditation I've shared with him, to the point that people have been surprised at how quickly he's recovered. They're the stories that I want people to tell.
Yeah.
And they're the stories I want to share, because that's what gives power, to these conversations. I remember going to a big conference in London, and I think the director of US operations for Plum Village, Thich Nhat Hanh's world, stood up on stage. First thing he said is, mindfulness is not a certificate. First thing, and he said it again, mindfulness is not a certificate. It's about the stories we tell each other of how we deal with life and how we find things that work for us and share them so we can learn together. And I thought that was quite brave of him, because I think the audience was largely certificate holders. So, it was interesting that he did that, but that resonated with me, that it's about how you've applied this, what you've learned, and how you've shared it, and then how you're taking note of how it's impacting people at a really personal level. That almost to me became my purpose, is where you find your purpose. That felt like I'd found this noble purpose, that I was starting to help people, I guess, translate this very broad church of mindfulness into something that they could apply within the context of their world and use effectively to help them. That was my cause. That was my purpose. And so I'm quite proud of that, because that's got nothing to do with money or performance. That's just being willing to share and willing to help. And I think that's a lovely thing to be driving us all. That sense of giving people, that person that sent that note to me saying, I am now in a more positive place, you've given me hope, was probably the most intense email that I've ever got from anybody. But that kind of sums up that if you get it right, you get that sort of feedback, and that's more than 10% and 5% as a measure. I'll just share. People say, how effective has your training been? I'll just send them 5 pages of, this is what people have said. Not me. These are the stories. Stories are so powerful.
But 10% happier is good for book titles, so to make them sell. What I hear is also a rebel quality, and the way you just phrased it is that you hear an entrepreneurial sound in what Stasi just shared. Yeah. And maybe an entrepreneur needs a bit of rebel quality to not go with the flow, but also sometimes have the courage to go against the flow, to think up something new, and to really serve the people that you're addressing, and not thinking that you can simply repeat, put the record on repeat and go there forever.
No, you're absolutely right. And I always remember Richard Branson, when he was talking about his business, he was sort of showing his bell curve of the business. And he said, all of my competitors are looking at the 2 standard deviations around the average. That's where all my competitors are. I'm looking at 4 standard deviations away from the edges. That's a bit more complex, but needs a bit more work, a bit more thinking. because that's where the opportunity is. And that's, I like not being normal, if that's the right thing to say. I've taken over recently chair of Bamba, so I do have some responsibility to kind of keep it sensible in the framework of that. But actually there is this part of me that almost became the frustrated creative being a trader. I didn't have a creative outlet. And actually me finding this sort of mindfulness thing through my lived experience actually helped me also express my creativity. And so I got great joy from that personally.
Exactly. And the rebel is a creative energy. We don't have to block out other people who do different things, but make space for innovation. And that's the theme of this year, understanding markets and innovation, and make sure that we don't stick with what has worked in the past, but that we prepare for that future where we have to go to the people and not the other way around. We have Daniela already she's a consultant. I think, Daniela, you worked at the side of the client before, and now you work with clients from the outside. And also Robert has some contributions, which is a bit different, and it's good to have different voices here to hear them. So may I invite you, Daniela, and then Robert, please?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, first of all, Mark, it's you triggered, encouraged me to move more into storytelling, and since I've been hiding and backwards in the science stuff, talking and measuring stuff. So it's both. I think it's both. So where I'm coming from is personally, I learned mindfulness with Aikido. It's a Japanese self-defense art. I learned breathing techniques, and I made my career in SAP software environment as a technology consultant. And it helped me to move through all the challenges as being a woman in a man's world and being disprivileged with lack of academic support around me and all those stuff. So this helped me a lot and guided me. And it was very late I discovered mindfulness, and it was not a first love at first sight, wasn't it? Totally not. But within SAP, working later in SAP itself, they have a huge program of mindfulness. I discovered that program by accident because I was, long story short, after a burnout, became a mindfulness trainer. And got curious to bring in SAP mindfulness to the Dutch community, to the colleagues. And they invited me, the requirement was to learn the Search Inside Yourself leadership program, which is their basic home base for the success in mindfulness program. And it's also a grassroots initiative with Peter Bostelman, who started 2012 in 3 people, and they have discovered their own benefit with meditation techniques and mindfulness, and delivered it with this in Google founded program, the leadership program. Until today, I was very into the figuring part. So the opportunity to measure the successes, to translate it into financial, tangible, I say truth, because people like to have figures for their decision makings. For me, it's just another language. Figures are just another language, and translating stuff which is mirroring the situations. And SAP is a good example in how to measure the employee engagement, the leadership trust, figures like that, to make it a point of discussion. And in any employee survey, it comes on the table. But most of it, why I left SAP, was that I experienced myself living mindful at the workplace. So we started meetings with 1 minute in silence. So I know from the inside out how valuable it is to change the culture from caring for each other, not only for a glass of water or tea or coffee, but also to settle the mind for a moment to allow this in this quick changing world and demanding world and unsecure world and all those things, and that we have the same language. So mindfulness, in my opinion, also inclusive or intercultural. It's a base ground where anybody can adapt to with their own religion and beliefs, and yeah. So since I discovered this for myself and learned this is possible to live it, not only to preach it, and all those, you know, all those teachers coming along and say how to live and all the well-beings and to-dos you have, and this employee self-service and that. But as in the moment you experience it yourself with your colleagues, yeah, since then I left SAP to share this, because I know it's possible to live a mindful work culture. And there's still a lot to do in our culture. It's still a challenge to have a break, to challenge to speak openly, to trust each other. And so, yeah. And then also, yeah, new concepts. I'm still searching for new concepts, how to bring it into the world. Yeah.
The word you use, trust, is so significant. People have to trust you. You have to convey trust. You have to build trust. Otherwise, people don't listen. And so that's becomes and that's about how you show up as a person. You know, as Catherine said, as you embody it, you know, it comes across. And it comes across in not just what you say, but how you say it. And even the sound of how you say it is part of the bit of you that connects with these people in front, that makes it so super powerful, really. If you get all those qualities right. I know there's some programs where people turn up and almost just read text out, and of course that just becomes that you know, it just doesn't sound as though you're building any trust at all. So yes, I think it's lovely for you to share that story. I know several of the people at SAP, like Matt Champion and Peter, that have done such great work in keeping that a sustainable program within the business. And well done you for seeing your purpose in a way and feeling that this is something that you want to share. So that's, you know, that's brave of you. So really, really important. And congratulations.
Thank you.
Which is another example that knowing the context, you just said what you say and also the way you say it. You need to know the culture, because people who build trust, if you want to build trust, you have to know the culture, because people need different things to build trust. You say the same thing in two different contexts, and in one context you build trust, in another you don't.
Yeah, and I think it's visible almost immediately. I mean, I speak to people in hedge funds and big trading companies for all sorts of work, and they share with me that yeah, we had somebody came along and they wanted to do a 5-week mindfulness course for us. They offered it free. That was the only way they could get in. They turned up and they didn't get past session 2 because the language was wrong. It wasn't embodied. It didn't understand where it was within the culture. And so when people asked the questions, they didn't understand the questions because the person didn't understand that world. And so I guess it's an example. If you come from certain worlds, they can often be the source of the place to go. And when we're selling, we often forget our history and the logic of our history, and using the logic of our history as a way to drive us into certain communities with the right language. But I've found that certainly with some mindfulness companies I've spoken to, that they've got the wrong bait, fishing for the wrong fish in the wrong ocean, and they're wondering why they can't win business. So if you get the right bait, going after the right fish in the right ocean, then you will have more chance of winning business. And a lot of that is about just connecting up with our own purpose, our own journey, our own skills, and the languages that we're familiar with in the work that we've done, and maybe get sticking to those worlds because that's our natural place.
Yeah. Which doesn't mean that we can't pivot to other places when we get to know them. But before we get to know them, we have to get our feet wet. Can't go just by going into another place. Before, I would really like to touch on the difference that you make in programs, mindfulness or not mindfulness, MBCT, not MBSR, certificates, what have you. But before that, Robert and Gerrit, I'm happy to ask you, would you please speak up and bring your experience? And Robert, you said you have a different experience, so maybe we get some pepper and salt into this. Please speak up.
Well, I was just going to say a little bit what you've both just said in a way, and it was the conclusion I was coming to listening to what's been said this evening. That, as you said, Mark, people have to trust you. And, you said, Katharina, you have to know the culture. I mean, it seems to me it's more than just being embodied. It's looking like one of us. It's sort of, I mean, I just had a quick look at your podcast, Mark, the AlphaMind, and on the face of it, there's not a lot. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of mindfulness woven in, but at a first glance, you don't see the word mindfulness very much. There's a lot about trading, and it looks like something that would be very inviting for people of that world. I can see how that would fit. But for the world I'm in, which is healthcare, the different things inspire trust, I suppose. So we need all the time. We need figures. We need to demonstrate effectiveness with randomized control trials. We need to demonstrate, extensive training and safety and things like that. Those are the things that turn on the people in my world. And the stories, for example, I'm sure they would add something, but unless you could show them a graph going the right way about stress levels reducing, they're probably not going to bite that line that you're talking about. So I mean, it's been quite a sobering conversation for me, because we've been quite successful in healthcare settings and public sector settings, but not in the corporate world. And it does make me think, actually, that it's not just what you say and how you say it. It's how you, as you say, probably within seconds, people will decide whether you're one of us or not, and then it's probably very difficult to get in if you're not one of us, I suspect. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you could put me right.
No, I think you are right. And the one of us perhaps isn't necessarily how you look, because of course half of us are casual nowadays anyway, so we're not turning up in suits. But it's actually the language, I think. The language connects to that. Do you know us? Yeah. Do you speak as we do, perhaps? And having a sales background, I'm a bit of a chameleon, so I can get a bit East Londonish if I want to, and talk that way. But I can also go to the other end and be Queen's English. And sometimes it's just latching into just intonations and body language as well, also as part of that connecting with someone. But I think that particularly with Zoom and whatnot now, it's the language that you use and how you come across in that language, I think, is very, very important. Be that called corporate because that's the design of that, then that's what it takes. So I think that there is opportunity for those that are looking to build out their corporate connectivity to think about that. Just think about, well, if we're going to send a pitch in, what would the client expect that would impress them?
Sorry to interrupt. It's making me think of a conversation I had with the Royal Marines about mindfulness, and they were very interested. but they said it's out of the question that you call it mindfulness. You know, that's totally won't work. You know, we let's call it performance management.
Yeah.
And we didn't get the contract in the end, but you know, it was a very different. I think the worlds were just too far apart, actually.
But the special forces are doing this anyway. I mean, we have ex-Navy SEAL commander come on our podcast, and he's got Men Talking Mindfulness as his thing as a podcast in America, and he comes on sharing that vision, and it gets very deep. But I think also this the wrapper, the what you call it thing. Well, when I did this stuff in RBS and NatWest Markets, and I positioned it, I didn't call it mindfulness. I called it Mind Fit, the power of now. Because I knew that if I called it mindfulness, I don't know that anyone would have turned up. But because it had linked some degree of fitness involved in the title, it felt like something that was better to get the people to come along. And actually, there was the degree of sort of performance elements to the word fit. And of course, it power of now, we're back to Eckhart Tolle's work. So some people were aware of that. And so it created the interest. So I think the wrapper, as you say, is almost the most important thing to carefully think out, you know, before you approach somebody. I'm with a sales background. I can tell you that people say, well, how do I close? How do I close the sale? The easiest way to close a sale is to get the open right. So if the opening, how you position it, the tone, the language, the look, the feel, the wrapper, if that's right, you know, you're already bridging this gap with someone that's getting in the right mindset to make a decision. Get it wrong, and you may not know you've got it wrong until you spent 3 months chasing the client, and it's ended up with them saying, well, we're not really interested, you know. So getting the start right is really, really important. And Robert, I think you very correctly suggest there that wrapper, what are we going to call it? Never mind the content. We can have whatever content we like, but what do we call it? What gets us through the door becomes really, really significant.
And Robert, you just confirmed that for your market, you need the numbers, you need the statistics. While in another market, they probably couldn't care less. But knowing that and putting that in the right narrative, I think also Daniela told us about that, Stasi told us about that. So that is the essence. And I like that image that you use, the metaphor, the right bait, the right ocean, the right fish. Yes, but we have to know. So we cannot just step from one culture into another and think we can copy paste things. Mm-hmm. And yes, the traditional, the conventional MBP programs, they have mainly been developed for therapeutic situations. We are today not talking about therapeutic situations. We are talking about the workplace, where the people who are still relatively healthy are working, but they can still benefit from having a mindful lifestyle. And I just wanted to say that in Belgium, the military also has a program. One of our members is active there. He's a military himself and a mindfulness teacher. And the program is called Mindful Warrior. And that really speaks to people, Mindful Warrior. So to be able to think up a title like that, you have to be within the culture. You have to be inside and then step outside to look at it, but step back inside again. Geert, you offered to share your experience. Would you please?
Yes, I can. I can share a little thing. Am I understandable enough? Okay. So, well, I want to share a little thing about renaming, or re-expressing. And even though I am not on a regular basis in the business world, this is business world is actually not my base. Even though I am every now and then doing workshops in business, so my main base is training mindfulness teachers. So I have a training institute for mindfulness teachers. So I recently had a training in a company, and as you know, the word resilience is very much used. It's very common. But I renamed resilience in a way, as you, Mark, also indicated. I said state or condition, and differentiated it in a condition of the body, the condition of the emotions, and the condition of mind, a state of mind, and so on, and how they are interlinked. And that made much sense, and I connected this to behavior. And in the German language, condition is called Verfassung. So it's started with an V. I don't know if I expressed the letter exactly. Verfassung. And behavior, the first letter in German is Verhalten. So you have two words with the same starting letter. And then I made kind of a circular causality. In systemic theory, it's called circular causality. Like the one is having an impact on the other and vice versa. And then, of course, and I think this is very simple in a way, because you immediately can create examples, or the participants have immediate examples how they can have an influence on their state. Small, like micro practices, like going to bed early enough to be fresh in the next morning, and also during out the day, a lot of little micro practices which immediately make sense to them, that they have an impact on their states of state of health, mental state, and so on. Then it's of course very understandable and rational for them that a good state, a positive state, have enough impact on their performance. And so this made very much sense. It's quite simple, and had a little bit with a renaming, like resilience, naming it in German, Verfassung, and connecting it to behavior, and then also, of course, to mental behavior in a sense like mindfulness, like being there, being awake is also kind of a mental activity or a mental behavior. So thank you. That's what I wanted to share.
I like that, Gerd. That's very kind of you to share. A lot of overlap with what I've spoken about. I note in what you've shared there, and little and often is a lovely phrase too. I remember going down the gym in my teenage years, and my first time down the gym, first thing I want to do is to get 50 kilo weights and start doing this. And the smart guy in the room was a British Army fitness trainer in the corner with his sort of a very old tracksuit on. He was about 60 or 70 years of age. And he had a team of 5 or 6 people around him. And they were just doing lots of like 5 kilo weights. Those were the fittest guys in the room. The other guys were idiots like me, thinking I could just press, and keep on doing 100 kilos and wondering why I couldn't. But the little and often of what the British Army fitness guy was doing, this little weights, but doing it a lot, is exactly the philosophy I love for the applicability of mindfulness. It's almost like using mindfulness as the punctuation for a day, little commas and full stops into the day as punctuation to break up the sentence of a day. I think is also a lovely way of just getting people to understand the need for it, because having one long sentence where you don't stop is unbearable, but having the need for punctuation into how you look at a day also encourages that step away, take a break, take a breath, change state, to sort of get yourself refreshed mentally to just be there for whatever's next.
Mm-hmm. Mark, with time remaining, could we also touch on that point where you say that's not MBSR, that's not MBCT, but go to the more general part, the mindfulness-based aspect, as associations, and not only as Mark Randall, the CEO of AlphaMind, but as Bamba, we are together in this field where we want the world to understand that mindfulness-based has a certain value that we want to protect. And we want to promote that more decision makers understand what it could mean if we would educate more people to be caring and mindful. So other than addressing your clients with a different narrative, how do you look at this, we could almost say, public relations, public responsibility to get mindfulness onto the agendas of decision makers?
Well, it's a very, very good question, perhaps not an easy one to answer. I think in a way we've talked about the language need and the wrapper need to be important. And I don't think we should cheapen in any way the value of MBCT and MBSR, certainly at the clinical level of delivery, and the need for robustness around training and robustness around supervision and all the various things that control the quality and the authenticity of that work. It's almost a case that work needs its own sort of framework to be kept almost sacred, as the foundation that people dip into through the mindfulness-based approaches. And of course, there's so many. I think there's 10 or 12 that are recognized by both Bamba and Diamba, with the much discussed Mark Leonard's one, I think, being the latest to potentially be added, MBOE. So I think that they all need to be evaluated by the bodies that we are, by having people that with the right approach just qualify what's been done, how it's been done, and the authenticity and appropriateness of the people that are teaching that. And of course, you've got the world of retreats around that as well, because that's perhaps another conversation about whether they are what they say they are, and whether we have questions around to make sure that they're appropriate for people that are being then coming onto registers. But coming back to the rest of the MBAs beyond those 12, I think there probably are multiple versions, some of them perhaps like mine, a little bit personal, where they've become a personal journey that's wrapped up with a certain outcome in mind, and has got a bit of creativity around it. And I think that's been shared today from several of the people present. And I'm pretty sure if you put 100 different mindfulness teachers in a room and started to really talk about what they did and how they did it, you'd probably find more than 2 or 3 versions. There'd be people that are relatively close to training, but there are people that are exploring the edges. And so I think it's important to tell people what not it is, what it isn't as well. So I will say, I'm not coming in to deliver a clinical version of mindfulness. I'm delivering you, actually based upon the conversation of what outcomes you're looking for, a product wrapped up in a way that you're paying me to deliver, and with an appropriate sense of trust and authority behind it to deliver it for what you're looking to achieve as an outcome. But I think it's, from a regulatory body point of view, that's the right way of putting it. I think we need to have care for whatever we endorse, but also perhaps have eyes open to the way the world is moving. There doesn't appear to be much of a dialogue around digital delivery. We've talked about what's here, but there are 2 enormous companies at the forefront of the digital side, and of course the Gen Zs of this world may be dipping into that before they'll sign up for a 8-week or 2-week of anything because of their attention span. They'll just want answers now, and they'll go digital. So I think we have to bear that in mind. Maybe even to include some of that emergent philosophy that's really, really new to a lot of us into some of these conversations to understand, well, what does that mean? What does that mean for the future? Does the future of this space look like it does now, or will it be radically different? Particularly since we've got Chat GPT suddenly turned up from nowhere and has changed the world in 2 months. You know, what does AI look like in this world? Well, you know, I have no idea, but we mustn't believe that we're static. I think if we believe we're static, then we don't evolve. And if we don't evolve, I think that's a shame.
Yeah. So what I hear is your support and emphasis for looking at new mindfulness-based programs and making sure that they contain the essence of what we pretend to teach within mindfulness. But what we have lately experienced is that the word mindfulness is being used in so many contexts that it can be quite confusing and it can even become empty, because everything is called mindfulness, and even some approaches that they're not even mindfulness based, but for example, like Teresa often stresses, are yoga based. They just borrow the brand in order to sell what they are going to offer. And in that kind of world, a mindfulness-based program that is acknowledged, and that the Ayamba website, I think within a week, we have the page up on the international panel for the acknowledgement of MBPs. And it will be all the programs, also the programs that have been accredited or recognized by Bombay in the past. So we will make a big package of that, and then the group will continue. That is probably a much better base than to talk about mindfulness in general. Is that a correct summary of what I'm hearing that you support?
Yeah, I very much support that, and I think we look forward to engaging with you on that relatively soon. Yeah, I think having some sensible hands, sort of controlling things, is important, but with a view that there's stuff going on that may come into that world, you know, through the appropriate evaluation at some point, and not have our eyes closed to that is really, really important. And to ask questions about what are we not thinking about, you know, is a very important thing. What have we missed? And getting the view of the quiet people in the room, you know, asking what do teenagers think about this space, you know, because they're growing up in a world that's been 100% digital for them. What do they make of this space? And I think if you look at the word mindfulness, I think you're quite right, it's almost been the worst marketing campaign ever, because, you know, television promotes it in all these ways that just look so wrong. And so common parlance is, you know, people think about, you know, lotus positions, and maybe some television celebrities that have suggested they're doing it, but they're a bit awkward about it. There's advertisements on television that make fun of it. You know, use it as a sort of, not as a positive, but something they're just making fun of. Yeah, so I think we need to be aware of that. And it means that we have to be more on the front foot, maybe about a more active sort of communication program with the world, as it were, you know, to share thought leadership with them a bit more dynamically, and perhaps show that we're not scared of changing when it's appropriate to change, or to consider other ideas, and be at the vanguard of that, and to put effort into that, I think is really, really important.
May that be an invitation to all of us here to mobilize your own association to do this, because the main communication will be locally. At Ayamba, we can prepare things and we can help, but the real communication will be locally to convince decision makers. And on that note, on digital, in September and October, we will have an expert on mindfulness and virtual reality, Sid Desai. He was there when we had invited John Kabat-Zinn, and John really saluted what he does. And we will have Mark Montalban, who has a platform to support the actual practice, not the transmission, but to support people to really practice with a platform with SMS messages, which could be really interesting also to address the communities that you just mentioned, Generation Z and what have you, people who think differently, people who want to be approached differently. And we will listen to them to be inspired for more innovation. So with time almost up or already up, I didn't look at the clock. Is there anything else that we want to touch on? Maybe someone who hasn't spoken up. Teresa, I called out your name. Maybe you want to say something before we leave, or Dragana, or whoever. Is there something we want to say that can improve on the silence before we close this and thank Mark?
I just want to express.
Smiling.
Oh, sorry.
Yes.
So I just want to express my gratitude toward everyone here today, being present, being so supportive, and very inspired. As a young person, I'm still struggling a lot. And yes, so many questions coming up after this presentation. But yeah, I would like to say thank you. And I look forward to your new presentation soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Tian. Thank you. So, Mark, grateful that you've been here, shared personal things and professional things, helped us to look to the future. And please, let's stay in contact really, really good and mobilize associations to do the things that you suggested. We cannot do it from a central point. We have to do it from a decentral point because Europe has too many cultures, too many different ways of communicating. And we really need that. We need the cultural adaptation of what we are going, of our central principles.
Yeah.
Thank you all. Thank you, especially Mark.
Thank you.
See you soon. Have a nice evening.
All the very best. Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you. Bye.